Welcome to part 2 of the endocrine system lecture. We are going to be looking at the pituitary gland. We are going to be able to identify what hormones are made in what part of the gland, the functions of those hormones, and you'll ID the glands based on histology. We have a lot of drawing to do in lab today. Talk about where the pituitary gland is. This is the hypothalamus. I think it's a beautiful hypothalamus. And we have the mammillary body right here. We have the optic chiasm right here. Now, there's a white matter tract, and it's going to be extending from about right here down towards the pituitary gland. Here's that white matter tract extending, I guess, distal from the hypothalamus. And it actually goes to the sella turcica, which would be right here. I'm not going to draw that in yet. And it looks sort of like a funnel. So this white matter tract is a structure called the infundibulum. So this is called the infundibulum, and it's a white matter tract that is connecting to the posterior pituitary down here. Posterior pituitary would be down here. Since this is part of, or the end of the white matter tract, it actually resembles white matter. And this is all white matter. You actually have axons from the superior optic nuclei going down the infundibulum and terminating in the posterior pituitary. You also have axons from the paraventricular nuclei. We have the posterior pituitary gland, and it's sitting in the sella turcica. It is connected by a structure called the infundibulum, which means funnel, to the hypothalamus by this white matter tract that is taking axons from two nuclei, the superior optic and the paraventricular nuclei, and it is going to go down here. Attached to the posterior pituitary is the anterior pituitary, which is larger, right here, and it's going to look mostly pinkish in histology, and it'll have some blue dots in it as well. There. So, the pituitary gland is sort of inferior and rostral to the hypothalamus, and this is actually going to be the distal pituitary gland because it is further from the point of attachment. So that's how the pituitary gland is set up. We have the hypothalamus, it's connected by the infundibulum, which is a white matter tract, and the white matter tract ends at the posterior pituitary. Glued onto it is the anterior pituitary, and they actually have two different developmental parts. This one actually developed from part of the brain, or this one apparently developed from what eventually becomes the nasal epithelial. And this is in the sella turcica, like so, of the sphenoid bone. Pituitary gland is right there, and it is hanging from the infundibulum and the hypothalamus. So we have this infundibulum right here, and it is mostly connected to the posterior pituitary, while the anterior is hanging on. So here's the hypothalamus. There is, within infundibulum would be right here, attached to the posterior pituitary. And if you looked at the posterior pituitary, it really looks like white matter. So it's the size of a grape, protected by the sphenoid bone, and has two functional lobes. The anterior pituitary is all glandular tissue. This develops from epithelial tissue. Now, because it's further from attachment, this is closer to attachment, this is further, this would be called the pars distalis. And this has always bothered me because some of the histology slides make it look like the pars distalis is closer to the hypothalamus, but in reality, it's getting pushed by how they make the slide. So this would be the pars distalis. Now, the posterior pituitary develops from nervous tissue, so it's called the pars nervosa. So this looks like white matter there. This, we're going to see glandular tissue 5 billion times today. So the posterior pituitary is the pars nervosa. The pars intermedia separates the two. So this would be the pars intermedia, right there separating the two. we have our pituitary gland. It's attached by the infundibulum, right there. Well, this would be the infundibulum, ending about there. And there's axon tracts going from the paraventricular nuclei and the supraoptic nuclei that are going to control the posterior pituitary. Axon tracts going down. So the posterior pituitary is definitely controlled by axons from the hypothalamus, so this would be neural control. Now, the anterior pituitary is controlled by the hypothalamus too. So we have these neurons just in the ventral hypothalamus, and those axons don't go very far. They go to right here. But this is a blood vessel plexus. It is actually a weird arrangement of a blood vessel, which we'll talk about on the next slide. But these neurons secrete their neurohormones that all have inhibitory hormone or releasing hormone in their names. And those hormones are going to travel a total of 2 centimeters, 1 inch. And they are going to go and tell the anterior pituitary what to do. So you have the hypothalamic pituitary tract going down the infundibulum to control the posterior pituitary. Then you have these tropic hormones also released by the hypothalamus, and they'll control the anterior pituitary. And let's look at why this arrangement's actually weird. So normally you would have the heart leads to arteries, leads to capillaries, where you have gas and nutrient exchange, leads to the veins, which always go back to the heart, except in 2 places. In the hypothalamus, we have an artery that is going to go to a capillary bed. So this is capillary bed. This goes to a vein. It's a portal vein, which means it's not going back to the heart. It's going somewhere else. Now, this portal vein goes to a bed around the anterior pituitary. So this is cap bed 2. And there it releases its hormones. So the hypothalamus, we have these neurohormones being released from the ventral hypothalamus. The hormones diffuse into the blood. They get taken to the anterior pituitary. So these are all going to be tropic hormones. We're not going to worry about what they're called, though. I want you to take away from this, the hypothalamus controls the pituitary. There's a white matter tract going down the infundibulum, and it controls the posterior pituitary. There's a plexus of blood vessels that take hormones from the hypothalamus to the anterior pituitary, then take the hormones from the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary to the body. Remember I colored in the pituitary mostly red with some blue dots? That's because there's 2 kinds of cells. There's acidophils and there's basophils. Acidophils are red and basophils are blue. And there's this 3rd cell called a chromophobe that lacks color. And because there's no chromophobe on here, I just drew one in there. And chromophobes don't stain. They either are not making any hormone currently, they're resting cells, or they're burnt out cells, or they're immature cells. So they're not completely sure. What we do know is that they're not doing anything. And you do see these chromophobes. So acidophils, the red staining cell, you have more acidophils than basophils, usually, or at least in all the slides I've ever seen, there's more acidophils. And they make 2 different hormones. You can't tell the type. They make growth hormone. Guess what that does? Right, it helps you grow. And prolactin. What's pro? Before. What's lact? Milk. So it makes milk. Now, basophils are blue. And they're going to make all sorts of different tropic hormones. Adrenocorticotropic hormone! That's a scary sounding word. Oh, adrenal gland. Cortex, tropic. Thyroid-stimulating hormone. Guess what it stimulates? The thyroid. Follicle-stimulating hormone. Guess what it stimulates? Yeah, follicles. So you could remember this by acidophils are red, basophils are blue, chromophobes lack color, and I love chocolate. Yeah, I love chocolate. 6 anterior pituitary hormones. All 6 are tropic. So even though growth hormone and prolactin affect non-endocrine targets, all 6 of them are tropic hormones. Hormone helps you grow. So here's Barry Bonds in 1996 when he started playing for the Giants. Don't quote me on that year. Here's Barry Bonds in, 2002? 2003. He got a lot bigger. And look what it did to his head even. Look how big his head is. I'm an A's fan, by the way. So, it's a metabolic hormone. It causes growth, mainly of muscle, bone, and it repairs things. So if you go running for, 26.2 miles, you're going to be making a lot of growth hormone because you damaged all these tendons and ligaments and microscopic proteins. So it increases protein, and it also increases cell metabolism. It causes fats to be broken down as energy. Great, let's make it a diet pill. Oh, wait a second. It increases muscle size, including the heart. So what happens with this as a pill is you got a bigger heart. That sounds good. But the heart was not as flexible as it should be and not as elastic. So that could lead to heart failure. Andre the Giant, my favorite wrestler growing up, he had gigantism, which is you make too much growth hormone. He died of an enlarged heart. Very sad. Now, injections can be used for bone repair. So Steph Curry, Andre Iguodala, all these warriors hurting themselves, they're probably getting some growth hormone as injected as repairs. Don't quote me. They're also getting stem cells injected for repair. Now, illegal injection, we're talking to you, Barry, greatly increases muscle mass. Prolactin, before milk, causes milk production, not release. Oxytocin is milk release. Now, it's made right before birth, and as long as the child breastfeeds, there's a positive feedback loop that continues production. Breastfeed, you make prolactin, it's milk, and the baby can breastfeed. So, and it can cause milk production in newborn babies. It's called witch's milk. So because there's some hormones in mother's milk, it gets passed on to the babies. That's your fun fact. Now, too much of it inhibits libido in both men and women. It actually does have some roles in women and men. You'll probably talk about those in physiology. And it delays menstruation. This is the tropic effect. It delays menstruation after pregnancy in 70%. I've heard of enough people that have had kids within a year of each other to say that 30% where it doesn't inhibit libido is a humongous 30%.